And we are live. This is going to be episode 252 Better on Draft Podcast. My name is Ken. We've got a different look today. If you are watching on the video, which of course you can watch us live, facebook.com/, Better on Draft, youtube.com/, Better on Draft, Better on Draft TV, and twitch.tv/, Bod Podcast when we're live. But this is a special Sunday episode. That's right. We are live. It's Sunday. It is 2 o'clock Eastern here in Michigan, but it is 7 o'clock where my guest is today. Welcome, Henok of Omnipollo. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks. Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you taking the time and getting into our studio. So my first question, you mentioned in the pre-show when we were kind of chit-chatting that you have a beer. What are you drinking right now?
Oh wow! About 3 years ago, we got to know a beautiful fella called Matt, and he was going to go start a brewery in Richmond, Virginia, called The Vale. And the rest is history. As we know, it's one of the greatest breweries in the world. But we hit it off pretty heavily. He came to visit us in Sweden, and back and forth we went. We have a collaboration series going called Tefnut. And about, I think, 1 year ago, he brewed a tribute beer called Henok from Omnipollo. So the bottle art here I'm showing you is kind of a drawn version of my face. So I felt like I would crack it open for this occasion.
And that was from what brewery again?
The Vale in Richmond, Virginia.
Now, that's not the first brewery that's used your likeness and your name. There's also a Imperial Ice Cream Sundae Stout from Tired Hands. Have you
That's right. Yeah.
have you gotten a chance to try that yet?
I mean, it's like Christmas when these bottles arrive. I had that one about 6 months ago, I think, on can. And this one comes on bottle. And this is actually the apple brandy barrel aged version. So I've had the original, this one as well. And let me read what this says. It says blueberry double chocolate chip maple marshmallow mocha triple stack pancake imperial stout aged in layered apple brandy barrels for 18 months. I think it's pretty neat.
I I want to talk to you about that real quick before we kind of get into gypsy brewing because you mentioned about 55 to 60 different ingredients in that beer and none of them were, the standard barley, hops and malt. Why do you think the craze of these pastry and adjunct stouts have just kind of exploded? Because obviously there's a lot of options and thoughts of different things that you can put into these beers, but I feel like everywhere I go there's those as well as the variants and the barrel aged you have here in Michigan, the Dragon's Milk, the Flying Buffalo, the No Rules. Like, why do you think everyone is so keen towards these pastry stouts?
That's a good question. I mean, for us, I can speak for ourselves and kind of our story and background. I mean, we got into beer because we wanted to make it fun in our home market, so around Sweden, Scandinavia more specifically. And I think that every time we kind of diverged a little bit from a traditional style, we saw people smiling more as they were drinking it. So that was kind of a feedback loop that we harnessed and kind of ran with. That said, though, I thoroughly enjoy it as long as it's well thought out and well executed. So there are a lot of pastry stouts out there that are harder to drink for me personally. This drinks super, super well. And I think that we've kind of went backwards in our development. Like we use fewer ingredients these days than we did just a couple of years ago. The drinkability is key, obviously. But I think that, you want something that's an experience. It's not like alcohol and beer just overall is a healthy hobby. And so if you're going to do it, once in a while, kind of hit those high notes flavor wise, I think you want an experience, like a trip. And yeah, these pastry stouts kind of provide that in the dark end of the beer spectrum. So I think that's part of the answer anyway.
Now, the talking about the beer spectrum, your catalog really focuses on three different styles. You've got your stouts, your IPAs, and your sours. You personally, you do touch on a few other different styles throughout, like if you hop on Untapped or Beer Advocate, you see it. But do you have now that you have your own home base, any styles or different types of beer that you want to start brewing more regularly?
That's a super good question. I think you summed up our repertoire pretty well there in those kind of three pretty focused areas. Now that we open our own place, I find myself walking around these tanks thinking, okay, what am I going to put in that tank and that tank and that tank? And we have about 11 tanks here to fill at any given time. And I realized, I'm not going to fill them up with the exact same thing we've been doing all these years. I'm going to try to do stuff where I can be more hands on. And what ends up happening for me on a kind of brewing level is I start making lager beer, or start focusing even heavily on like lower ABV hoppy beers, these delicate styles that I haven't been able to, as a contract brewer, to be very touch and feely on. Like these are styles that I think require more kind of everyday attention and care. And these breweries that we work with are some of the best in the world. They definitely give those beers that, but like to give it an Omnipollo twist, I think requires us to have our own brewery.
Well, now that you have your own brewery, you were mentioning, first of all, you mentioned the unhealthy habit. Obviously, the amount of calories that go into some of these, especially pastry stouts. You're talking 300-400 calories just for a can or a bottle. But you are making, and you have made in the past, I should say, non-alcoholic beers and low no ABV beers. In the United States, we're seeing this trend start to go up as we are becoming a little bit more healthier. We're seeing like the seltzer craze. We're seeing people choose to where they want to go with those low cal beers. They want to go with the Two Hearted made a Light-Hearted, which is their low cal IPA. Dogfish had made one. Sam Adams, I believe, made one. And then you go into the non-alcoholic, and you have your Partake and your Athletic. Um, I think we're lagging behind the rest of the world with the non-alcoholic beers. What is it like in Europe and other countries for non-alcoholic choices and beers? And then where do you see it moving into the U.S. a bit more?
Non-alcoholic beer is our fastest growing category. It sounds so business-wise to frame it that way, but it's the category of beers that are growing at the fastest rate, albeit from a small level. But it's we're definitely seeing an exploding interest in those in Europe, and funnily enough, we're also sending a lot to Asia. But that's mainly due to the collaboration we have with IKEA Japan, and they buy about four different types of beers from us, non-alcoholic, each 6 months, and that kind of generates a certain volume. But I think it's a trend that's going to continue simply because the younger generation of drinkers are kind of leaning more towards drinking less and leading a more healthy lifestyle. But also, again, like if you can pack all the flavor in there, like we have pretty flavorful non-alcoholic beers coming out, like blueberry soup. It's just an example of that, which I think tastes more or less the same as our 7%, blueberry sour beer. Why not? If it's a Sunday, like you and me sitting here today, we all got to work tomorrow. It kind of makes sense, I think.
I think a lot of people are starting to pay more attention to the ABVs of beer. We had, and I don't know if it's the same in Europe, and you can correct me, but at least in the United States, 2015 and 2016, everyone I think was just trying to get to the next level of ABV, whether, barrel aging it and getting to the high double digits. We have, some breweries out here in the States, like the brewery it's in California, which all of their 750s are usually 18 to 20% ABV. Here I am. I'm drinking a nitro cold brew coffee from Guinness because I want something that's just low ABV, easy to drink, but also not going to get me drunk at 2 o'clock on a Sunday. Um, we're continuing on that trend. Seltzers have just exploded here, and easily the biggest. That's where our market growth is in the United States is seltzers. We have big names like Mark Anthony and Sam Adams making your Trulies, and we've always had those. Not craft cocktail beers because we've always had Mike's Hard, Smirnoff Ice, but until like White Claw came through, nobody really drank the hard seltzers, and now literally everyone not only is making one, especially small breweries, but these big breweries are pumping them out. I see you guys have a few different seltzers in your list of beers that you make. Are you making seltzers at the new brewery? And where is that trend going out in Europe?
Yeah, I think it's it's two different things to me. Like on the one hand, you can kind of think of the health aspect as a direct a reason to produce these beverages. On the other hand, it's kind of like, hey, there's this thing that's not beer. Let's go try it out. And I think we've kind of subscribed to the second uh, like way of looking at it, which is let's try to pack as much flavor into this other thing that's not beer if it's exciting. And honestly, like we've had some pretty fun outcomes experimenting with seltzer. I don't know how healthy they are, but they taste a lot, and my wife likes them, which is the first time in 10 years she's ever like kind of thoroughly enjoyed a beverage that I've produced. And so we want to do more of it at our brewery for sure. But I think staying true to kind of where we come from. I think we'll be more leaning towards lager beer for the kind of drinking experience and towards a seltzer for the flavor experience. And honestly, working with as much fruit as we work with, I kind of feel that it gives us another platform actually to kind of take the fruited aspect of it even one step further. So we've had some great results experimenting with it so far, and I look forward to doing more of it. Like I get pretty excited. I got a care package from Smooge. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Yep.
A couple of weeks ago, I was more excited to try those seltzers than I am trying most beers. And that's the first time I think I've had something non-beer related be as exciting as a beer for me. We experimented with mead a couple of years ago, and it just didn't like spark the same excitement for me. Although I love mead, great mead. It just as a producer, I think we lean closer towards that seltzer aspect. That said, though, nobody drinks them here in Europe yet, which
With
is weird.
Smooge, because I was actually gonna bring up Smooge because there's really two different types of seltzers out here in the U.S. Because you have your low carb, low sugar seltzer, hard seltzer that everyone is drinking. But when Smooge came out, and you're talking this fruit heavy beer that's not low calorie, that's not low sugar, like it doesn't mess around, but people go crazy after it. And when they have releases and people talk about when it gets to these beer stores like Zutuna Liquor over in Rochester Hills, people just clamor over it because they want it so bad. And we see that not, while everyone still wants these hard seltzers, a lot of people don't. If they want something with a faint taste, they're just going to go to a White Claw. But if they want something that's going to be a little bit more impactful, they're going to go to your Middle Coast. They're going to go to these. Atwater has its own seltzer, so we're seeing it here too, and we're seeing a lot of mead makers kind of go into the seltzer game. We had a meadery out here in Michigan that would carbonate their seltzer or carbonate their mead and add water and basically turn their mead, which is a really sweet drink, into a seltzer, and a lot of people would love it just because it doesn't hit you in the face. For those of you watching the video, Dan has joined us. Dan, welcome to the show.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. Sorry for running late.
You're all right. What are you drinking, real quick?
I'm actually have nothing. I had an interesting story to tell you once we're all done from here, but I'm actually not drinking at the moment. It's only 11 a.m. So
it is only 11 a.m. out there in Phoenix. That's all right. Now, my next question, I had gotten the opportunity to learn a lot about you going through some of your other interviews, and you talked about doing a lot of tracing to your Ethiopian roots, including there was a time where when I'm reading the story right, you found an oasis in the middle of this palm tree jungle, which serves as the inspiration for, and I'm probably gonna like Italianize this, but it's Fata Morgana. How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, Fata Morgana is how
Okay.
we say it. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so that's one reason where you get inspiration. Like, where do you get inspiration for a lot of these beers, especially as you were traveling the world making them?
I think travel is the key word, which makes kind of the past year um, horrible in that regard. Like we've been traveling and working with some of the best brewers out there. That's definitely the main part of my inspiration for what we do. But you draw from your past. You look at people's faces when they drink what you've produced, and you kind of tag along with the feedback you're getting. I really feel that we were quite, I think, relatively early on social media as a brewery, and we've been at it for about 10 years. I think that the amount of feedback you're able to get online, whether it's Rate Beer Untapped, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is, it's kind of like, I mean, if you can harness the energy that's in all those feelings that are being projected your way around what they do, it starts with one idea, and then you can kind of run with it. So I think that, sure, like a series of beers might come from a specific instance, whether it's a type of beverage or a dish you ate when you were young, and then from there it's just like going along with kind of what gets people excited. And it's been, I think it's been a kind of beautiful symbiosis between what we do and what people feedback us with. But I am Ethiopian. You're right about that. I grew up in Sweden. I was born here. And we've been moving around quite a lot. And I think for sure that definitely is part of our story and my story more specifically. And I hope that comes through in our beers. I used to, when I was young, I wanted to become a pastry chef, for example. So, kind of the pastry aspect of our beers really ties into that part of me. Like I live in my mouth, so to speak, and I have a sweet tooth. I think that shines through in our beers. But I can also kind of look at the other aspect of our beers, like how drinkable are they, and kind of try to harness energy that's coming from, in our case, like either other brewers or feedback from drinkers. And I hope those both play, against each other to help create our portfolio.
When you're going to these breweries and you're going and brewing, especially around the world, even just the United States, every part of the country has its different tastings, different flavors, different styles of beer they want. Like, Dan's probably the only person that can drink barrel aged 20% beer in 120-degree weather.
Absolutely.
Welcome to the club, Dan.
Yes, it's amazing. I can't drink anything else. It's ruined me.
I'm the same.
What is the process that you go through? Like, for instance, say, one of our sponsors, you're coming to Michigan and you're gonna go do a brew at North Center Brewing over in Northville, Michigan. How do you, like, what is your process working with the brewer and working with them to create a brew?
Yeah, I think as a contract brewer or I don't like the term gypsy brewer, but an ambulating brewer, like added value is key, obviously. Like we need to come and add some value. Otherwise, why would these absolute rock stars that we've been working with, give us the time of the day or kind of proceed with any collaboration that we want to go ahead with? And I think that we've kind of learned I wouldn't say the hard way, but we've kind of figured out that we need to come with a quite elaborate idea that we've thought through thoroughly based on the history of the brewery that we were working with, the market that they're in, our market, which hopefully provides a new perspective. I think we've been quite lucky as Europeans to be able to come in. And most, mind you, like most of the breweries we've worked with are American over the past years. And I think that kind of having the outside perspective, but also be relatable enough to say, hey, I think this will be really interesting. I think it's part of the answer. That we try to approach it in a quite researched way, but also try to bring something new to the table. But I think that's the sense, kind of the stress of adding value has driven us for the past 10 years, really.
All right. Now I have an idea. You said you don't like gypsy, as the name, for being a gypsy brewer. What about a nomad brewer? Even though you have a home now.
Yeah.
All right.
I
Well,
mean,
I mean,
Yeah,
we
no
could start
matter
a
Trying to
word.
change it up now, Ken?
we could
Let's
start a
start a new
petition.
trend.
We could start a petition. I mean, we have we'll use it now, a nomad brewer here in the U.S. Nowhere in particular, goes around and brews at other
Just shows up.
people's. Yeah,
Yeah.
just kind of shows up like,
Just
hey,
kind of,
hey, I'm just
hey,
gonna brew here today.
can I use
Um,
that?
Yeah.
when
I guess. Yeah. Sorry.
no. I was gonna say how long has it been? Because you just started brewing at your own place. How long have you been wanting your own place though?
I think I've had the best job in the world. I think like just traveling around doing making incredible beers, drinking incredible beers, sharing incredible beers with the best brewers in the world, not having to worry about kind of the brick and mortar aspect of it. And so for many years, I never thought we would. Like, I think Omnipollo for me, trying to define it was about spreading an idea about what beer can be, not a product necessarily. So this is a hobby for the first 3 to 4 years. And then it kind of transformed. We just had too much to do and kind of grew, and you start employing people and stuff happens obviously, but we never had the kind of brick and mortar brewery issue to kind of deal with. And then like 7 or 8 years in, we start realizing we've done this for a while. What's the next step? And we started looking at perhaps opening our own brewery. And now I can honestly say, I'm more or less sleeping in this building these days. Like it's extremely exciting. And I'm a home brewer still. So in that regard, it's kind of a big contrast. Like I literally walked in here a couple of months ago, and it was like going from being a home brewer to having a big kind of biggish brewery with a lot of technology crammed into it just in one go. It's a very, very kind of weird and unique sensation, I think. But I would say within the past like 3 to 4 years, it's really been like a top priority for us to open our own place. I think also, you kind of like the market changes and you realize like what you need to do to kind of make the beer more. I don't like better is a weird word, but like kind of personalize these more subtle styles, as I mentioned earlier. And I think that having our own brewery is kind of the only way to do that. Sure, we'll make crazy, super, experimental things here too. We've bought the equipment for it, but I think really the kind of subtle styles being like, again, about adding value. Like this was just kind of the next step for us, I think.
Awesome. So I actually have a question here for you because I'm kind of curious because I've spent a lot of time in Europe. And myself personally, from where I've been, most of the beer actually isn't that good compared to the US. So that's my personal opinion, of course. What kind of differences, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses you see between the US craft beer scene, the European craft beer scene? And are you drawing from a little bit of here, a little bit of there, or where are you pulling some of your inspiration from?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dan. I think that there are certainly some styles where Europe does really well and other styles where we don't do very well. And I think that kind of the craft beer 2.0 that we've entered and joined, where a lot of beers are hoppy, where a lot of beers are darker, higher ABV, I think we've been lagging behind big time. I mean, there's a reason we've been traveling to the US 5 to 6 times a year to brew with some of these great minds in the brewing industry. I honestly think that what we do have though is a very knowledgeable crowd in terms of the consumers. I think that we're very good at finding things out and researching things and appreciating beer. It's really in the consumer's DNA from many generations back. And I think that kind of my hope and my dream anyway is that as we as a European brewing community present new products and genres and kind of excel in different areas and this scene, kind of the craft beer 2.0 scene kind of grows, that we'll have a pretty eager consumer. And that's, it's really been kind of our experience bringing either American beers over to Sweden more specifically, or collaborating with brewers from the US and other places, kind of presenting them to the European market. But yeah, I see a pretty cool kind of 3 to 5 years ahead of us here, and that's it's against that background that we've made this almost 4.5 million USD investment in our own brewery. So don't make me nervous here, Darren.
I'm curious. Another kind of drawn off of that too. You mentioned you're Ethiopian, but you were born in Sweden. Did I catch that correctly before I start misspeaking?
Correct.
Do you find
Yes.
yourself looking to draw influences from somewhere like Ethiopia into your beers? Because that's something you don't see a lot of. At least in the U.S., you don't see a lot of African influence type of craft beer. Is that something you're looking to do or have explored in the past?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Darren. I haven't had that as a mission. I didn't start brewing with kind of that mindset. But my wife works for the foreign ministry, the Swedish foreign ministry. And so she gets moved every 4th year or 3rd to 4th year to a different geographical location. And so 4 years ago, roughly, she got moved to Ethiopia. And so we moved to Ethiopia, which also happens to be where my family comes from. And so kind of the idea of being there without either contributing to the craft beer scene there, which I feel that we have been to a certain extent since we've been brewing IPAs, which is a completely new style to Ethiopia. But also, bringing coffee over to Sweden to brew with at our brewery, or other influences technique-wise. Ethiopia is interesting. I think is more interesting and kind of a mecca when it comes to meat. Actually, I've had 3 of the top meat producers in the world kind of requesting to come to visit, but very few brewers. I've had 3 brewers come visit, beer brewers, that is, over the past 4 years. I think to me, it's like we're a very non-local brewery. We're very unpatriotic, if you will. Like, we really want to tie like-minded people from every corner of the world to this idea about craft beer, rather than say,
sure,
hey, this is Swedish, this is Ethiopian. But of course, if we're using ingredients from these countries, we want to tell that story for sure. I think your question is extra interesting from the aspect that Ethiopia was the fastest growing beer market in the world, 2020.
Oh, wow.
And what that means is basically there's not enough beer being produced for a country of 109 million people to service the market. And also every year, there's a certain percentage of the population that turn 18 every year. So I think for a beer company not to look at Africa, it's a mistake long term. We're too small, honestly, to kind of have these grand plans of taking over Africa and kind of making a difference. But I believe, not having one foot in if you're an exporting brewery, we're in 45 countries. We're not in a single African country yet. Like, if we didn't make the effort over the next coming years to be there, I think it would be a mistake.
Makes sense. Now, going back to what we were talking about with the, between the US and the European beer scene, what style of beer do Europeans tend to prefer? You look at the US, if it was me speaking for the US, and Ken would back this up, I would say it's barrel-aged stouts that everyone wants, but everyone's a hophead here, it feels like. Everyone wants one of the 19,000 IPAs that are out there. What do you see in Europeans going towards as far as beer style?
I think it's very similar, actually. I think the style, Europe hasn't caught on to the seltzer trend, but it's just a question of time, I think. But it's the same. I mean, hops is the absolute, like, hoppy beers are king here too.
Coffee beers, nice.
Yeah, and I think in terms of stouts, there's only that many you can drink of them, so it's a bit rough on the senses if you drink too much of them. But for sure, I mean, a big imperial stout, that's kind of in our history in one way, but it's also something that's coming stronger and stronger in terms of the pastry kind of adjuncted stouts. I think we've seen our beers grow year over year, to a large extent because of it. But I think really great hoppy beers are kind of low in supply here in Europe. I mean, there's a number of good brewers out there, but they distribute very locally. I guess like in the US, but there's just fewer players. So if you had in the US you have a couple of brewers that distribute locally, but if you have enough of them, you can kind of supply the entire country. I think here it's very localized. So you need to like make your way to this specific source, which makes it kind of hard to get a hold of. All the distributed stuff, or a lot of the distributed stuff, gets a bit old and tired pretty quickly.
Well, I can tell you, there's plenty here we could start shipping over. I'm sure there's no shortage of way too hoppy beer. Ken's laughing because he knows it's true.
Yeah.
So what kind of changes now that you have your own brewery? What kind of changes as far as what you make? What can we expect to see from you?
Wow. I think we also have an annex, like a separate building that has a lot of space for barrel aging. So we'll be doing a large portion of our barrel aging ourselves. That will yield a lot of the kind of on the pastry end of the spectrum. We have a beer in tank right behind me here called Cake News, which is an imperial porter, 10.5 ABV, brewed with a lot of coconut, Costa Rican coffee, some strawberry, some vanilla. That will be kind of a house pastry situation coming out. I think that would be really great. It's really made with kind of from a homebrew recipe of mine that I've been making for a while. Kind of the exact malts we want to use and the exact proportions according to the exact process. But then we kind of smash it with a bunch of hand-selected ingredients. I'm looking forward to that, like having the kind of imperial stout or porter come out of our tanks as our own brewery. But what I'm probably most excited about is the hoppy stuff. Like I'm very fond of hoppy beers, and there are good hoppy beers in Europe for sure, but I can't get a hold of them. So I figure we need to brew them ourselves, and we have a couple of bars here in Stockholm that we service. That's probably what I'm looking the most forward to, is like walking into one of those and they pour one of our beers and it's like brewed according to our exact specs and wishes, and delivered by ourselves in our own car, super fresh. That's number one. And then beyond that, we'll be doing a couple of other sour fruited experiments that we're looking forward to, but also our pilsners, our lager beers. I'm very excited about doing ourselves. I think that kind of just the fact that we've made provisions for several months of aging. We have 4 horizontal tanks in here that are going to be like exclusively holding lager beer, which means that we'll be putting them through in kind of serving the oldest one first, which will mean that it will probably never be less than 2 to 3 months old in lagering, which it's an exciting thought for me.
I believe that a lot of brewers, struggling with trying to get as much beer out as possible, especially if they're trying to meet demand, they don't lager beers that much anymore because that just takes up tank space. That's just so much extra tank space, so much extra time. And when you have the ability to do it, I think a lot of people love it. And I feel like we made an overcorrection going into seltzers, and I feel like we're going to go back towards. You were kind of mentioning it earlier, like the lagers and the pilsners. I think a lot of people, as you were kind of saying in Europe, like are going towards those lagers, those pills. But going back to, as we're going to keep using it, being a nomad brewer, what what were some of the struggles that you were having, traveling the country? Because you kind of go there, you brew, you're not there for the whole process of it sitting in tanks and fermenting. You kind of leave because you're going to go brew somewhere else. What were some of the negatives that we might not have seen as a consumer?
I mean, I've been super spoiled, Ken. So I wouldn't say, I don't have anything negative to say about these past 10 years. But what happens if the beer doesn't come out the way you want? That's for me, as a brand, it's a weird situation. It's never going to be a flaw to the beer, because again, these brewers are the best in the world, and they would dump a beer at the blink of an eye. But what if it's slightly too bitter, or not enough vanilla, or whatever it is. You still have to stand there tall and say, hey, this is an Omnipollo beer. Unless you want to, unless you really don't feel that it is, and it's happened, and we discard a beer, But I think that's just come with the package of being a nomadic brewer. Is you kind of have to make the best of it and say, okay, this didn't turn out exactly the way we wanted, but we'll fix it for next batch. And it sounds like a overused term, but being somewhat of a perfectionist, which I think most brewers are, that's excruciatingly hard to kind of accept, especially if you have, as the crowd is growing. I think last time I checked on Untappd, there were like 2 million check-ins or something. That's a lot of feedback,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not all Untapped feedback is good Untapped feedback.
It's still
true.
feedback.
We've seen plenty of the same. I was doing a beer review for a local brewery and looking at what some of the people in Untapped are saying, and we were joking earlier, like, I don't like hops 1 out of 5 on this IPA.
Yeah.
Somebody was doing a cherry wit beer, and he's like, I don't like cherries, and I'm like, well, why are you rating it in the first place? Like, sure, try it, and sure, if you want your cloud on Untapped, just check it in. You don't have to rate something. Do you see that type of consumer out in Sweden, like the very stuck up, snobby? Like we see it all the time here.
CBYs, we call them.
Yeah, the CBYs. Like in the US, again, you get these like the hops, or they try to tell you what you did wrong.
Yeah,
in your beer.
they walk.
Do you see that out in Europe, or are you not as pretentious as us here in the US?
I think it's it's easier for me to speak as a Swede about Swedish beer consumers, because I can kind of have a better grasp of Swedish culture. But I think that for a Swede, nothing's ever a 5, and nothing's ever a 3, if you want to use kind of Untapped terms. If it's the best beer you've ever had, it's max 4.25, And I think that we send the same beer to the US, and sometimes we need to change the spec or a name for it because of US TTB laws. We'll almost always have higher ratings on the beers that we've sent to the US than we've distributed in Sweden or Europe. And I think it's simply because, if you really like something, you're not afraid to say it in the US in the same way as you are in Sweden. Like, it just can never be the best thing you've ever had in Europe. It's always got to be like, good, but there's always this next best thing. Whereas I think in the US, it's like, it's either really shit or it's really good. And I actually prefer the US format in that regard. And I would say, yes, there is a certain level of pretension in the European beer drinker, in the sense that nothing's ever kind of the best thing you've ever had. So they're a hard crowd to please.
Now, as a personal question before we get into trademark and TTB, because we've got a big topic that we want to get to as we kind of end it up. You were mentioning trying to get into Africa as a country for distributing beer. Now there is a major player in Africa, which is Castle, which I believe is owned by ABI. Are you seeing any struggles getting into the continent itself right now, or does it seem very welcoming to try to bring in new different beers for the countries to try?
Yeah, we haven't gone like head on with any big breweries there. We've done so far. We've brewed beers at a small craft brewery in Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia, to release at kind of one-off events. And what we see is people love it. They go crazy for it. Like I think we did last time. We did a collaboration beer with Jeppe from Evil Twin. Actually, that was like 2 times ago. And he came down for it, and we just opened the doors and people flood in and kind of drink it up, and they can't believe it's beer. It was like a triple IPA with Citra, and maybe some Galaxy in it or something hazy thing. And it's kind of we're coming at it from that direction. Like, if we can find small, local actors to work with to either brew the beer locally or send our beers over, to kind of start spreading the word. I think that's the best we can do for the next coming couple of years at least. Whereas, if you start getting into bigger distribution, I think that's when you need trouble, or might be trouble, it's bought taps and all that stuff that we're also seeing in Sweden. I mean, it's the same here. It's really hard to get in to a place on draft because the system's just rigged in another way. You need to win on merit, and the bar owner being kind of converted into beer geekiness, and that's done one at a time.
I think we see that here in the United States when a bar owner gets into craft beer and you start seeing it slowly trickle and take over. Like instead, and they don't replace the major Bud Miller Coors, but they're going to replace your Killians with the Bell's Amber, or a Shock Top with a Oberon. Using Michigan beers for reference. You mentioned the TTB, and we wanted to get in here as our final kind of set of questions, because you guys sparked a lot of controversy in 2020, not on purpose, but it just kind of happened. But let's kind of go back a little bit. You guys created a beer called Yellow Belly, which was a collaboration with Buxton Brewing. Now, you guys don't make that anymore because there was a trademark dispute, correct?
Yes, right.
Does the beer exist in any other name or form, or are we done with it?
I mean, I don't want to say never, never, but
for now,
we're done with it. Yeah, we did 5 years. It was a good run, and weirdly enough, the last year we do it, it's kind of when it blows
up. Now, for context, we've talked about this on the podcast back in July of 2020, I believe. A World of Beer employee served a black man a bottle of Yellow Belly. For those of you who don't know, Yellow Belly is packaged to look almost as if a KKK member, like a KKK covering. Why don't you let's start from the beginning. Why did you brew the beer, and what was the reasoning behind the packaging?
Yeah, so we come at it from our own context. We're Europeans. And there was an election just over 5 years ago in Europe, EU election, and we have a very far-right extreme party in Sweden. At the time was very far-right extreme, but now it's actually kind of mainstream in a very real way over here. And as people were walking out of the ballot, they get asked by somebody who's keeping track for the polls, who they voted for, and a much larger proportion of people who or a much smaller proportion said that they voted for this far right-wing party than was actual fact. So 24 hours later, we kind of got hit by it in the face that, okay, wow, this political party is really like gaining ground. And at the same time, we weaved into a collaboration between, I think it was about 10 different breweries working with different colors and concepts. And we had been dealt the color yellow, and we were kind of like brainstorming what that color would mean. This sounds super abstract. Long story short, we were in it to make a beer that kind of portrayed what cowardness would be. And this kind of happened in the same week. And it just felt like, that's pretty rough. Like you voted for this party, you come out and you can't even stand for it, seconds later. It just felt like a cowardice thing to do. And so we made this beer where we used, it was a fake beer essentially, where we brewed a great imperial stout base with these English incredible brewers, friends of ours, and added peanut aroma and cookie dough aroma to it. There was no natural ingredients, kind of being the adjunct. At the time when we did it, it really felt like a pretty controversial thing. Like, it's done a lot these days, but at the time, it just felt like craft and aromas kind of didn't go well together. At least we didn't know of any other brewers that were doing it. And these two concepts of kind of trying to make a fake beer that said that it was one thing, so peanut butter biscuit stout, but only with fake peanut and biscuit. And it just felt like, an interesting take on this kind of same idea, which was, if you vote for something, why can't you stand for that at least? And Carl, our graphic design end of the company, dressed it in a quite controversial label. I'm not going to say that was the intention, but he has a pretty. I think Carl is really good at playing with imagination. It's kind of what I aspire to do with the beer as well. And so he created this label, which had a very controversial kind of association attached to it, and we released it. And I think the beer itself went down well in the European context and in an American context too. But we knew that label was going to be, it was going to bring some attention to it. But we were ready for it, who wants racism? Like, it's a pretty basic thing. I guess the thing that kind of like jolted people a little bit was you had to unwrap the cover to read the message, which is on the bottle. And I think if you read that message, it's kind of clear what it is about, but not a lot of people do. You kind of look at the bottle and get spooked by it, literally. And so, we've had to engage in the discussion, which is, on the one hand, it's kind of what we wanted to do, like engage in the discussion, but we didn't want to offend anybody per se. Like, this situation was unfortunate. And I was surprised that it happened so many years after we released the first version of it.
Now, I've walked by the bottle so many times. It always shows the higher rating, but for me, taking a gamble on a $15 to $20 12 ounce is just not something that I typically do. If I've had it in draft before at a festival, maybe I'll go. So I never got a chance to try it. But one of the things, the message itself, and there's a quote from, I don't know if it's from Buxton or it's from you, but the quote goes, "To us, one of the most cowardly deeds is to act anonymously, hiding behind a group, a signifying trait of institutionalized racism." And I think between the message on the bottle, I don't think, the world of beer employee, we talked about this on the show. I believe they were just trying to sell a $50 bottle of beer just to get a $10 tip. For those of you who are listening, maybe out of country, obviously the U.S. and the customer service we run on the tip industry. So a $50 bottle, that's going to get you a $10 tip right there. So for me, when you go and you ask for a suggestion, the salesperson in me, as in Dan, maybe even you, Henok, you're going to be like, "Oh, I'm going to give you the most expensive bottle and take my cash out." What's something that kind of finishing up before we end this interview? What is something that you guys, as well as Buxton, maybe took out of this whole situation? Because again, it happened 2 years later from your last batch, so you guys aren't brewing it anymore. You've been C&D'd. What are you guys taking out of this?
I mean, we're people, and we're not running this company to become rich. We're not running it to, for a legacy thing. We're running it because we enjoy running it, and we will make decisions on a daily basis based on us as people. And I think that, we did not want to offend anybody. And that's it's especially, somebody who has a very personal relationship to this symbol that we're portraying. But I think it's gonna be, we're gonna do more beers that aren't just about the hop varieties that are in the beer or the adjuncts, or that are about something else. And I think it's impossible for us to say that we're not gonna offend anybody ever again. At the same time, I think the overwhelming response to this beer has been positive, and I think it's been something that's been talked about over and over again. I mean, not unfortunately. I mean, I think the only unfortunate thing is it kind of took the attention of the European right-wing movement away a little bit. It became very much about kind of the US and the symbol that this beer bottle portrays, and that's a bit, that's a bit of a shame, but it's also given us, way more room to talk about it than if we wouldn't have done it. So yeah, I think it's we learn and try to iterate every single day, but I also think that as a company, I think a lot of people, the first response is, you're a company, you're not supposed to be political. And I did not get into beer to be political, but we're humans and we have opinions about things. And I think that for me, at least, beer drinkers on average have a more inclusive mindset than non-beer drinkers. And I tried to kind of harness that energy in this, like, screw racism. It just felt like a very controversial thing to kind of put out there. But yeah, I'm gonna stop at that.
No problem.
All right, one final question here. Let's a little bit of fun, not really beer little scene. Who's your favorite metal band out of Sweden?
Oh wow, shit, I should know these things.
Caught you off guard.
Yeah, you definitely caught me off guard. Like, I'm not. I think you need to write down a list for me, or send me a Spotify list if you're.
Said you list Swedish metal bands.
I'll be much better at Swedish hip hop, to be honest. But there
Fair
are
enough.
quite a few beer collaborations that have happened. I mean, if I say any, they're probably going to turn out to be non-Swedish. I don't know. I'm on a mark work with like Three Floyds. Are they Swedish?
Three Floyds,
Three Floyds is from Indiana.
The brewery.
Yeah,
in the
but I'm
US.
on a mark.
Oh.
I'm on a mark. This is a Swedish metal band that did a collaboration with.
A lot of metal bands have gone to Three Floyds. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Ken's
And
looking
send me a
it up.
list if you have any.
We will.
I'll have Dan send me out a little bit of a list for you to check out some bands, metal bands, I should say, from Sweden.
Awesome.
I guess my final question to you, and this is kind of what usually our co-host Nick asks, but what is that guilty pleasure beer that you're crushing in your fridge at home? So not like Omnipollo, like, out here a lot of people are like a High Life or a Miller Lite. What's that sneaky beer you love to drink?
I mean, it's Pilsner or Cows for me. Classic Pilsner. Sounds, I don't know, like in Europe, I think you'd be dumb not to reach for something that's like of a decent quality in that segment, at least. There's so many good lager beers over here, but that's definitely mine.
No, nothing wrong with Pilsner or Urquell. That's going to do it. Better on Draft Podcast, episode 252. My name is Ken. Dan, thank you so much for hopping on this Sunday afternoon. Morning for you, evening for Henok out in Sweden. Go check out, look up some Omnipollo if you do not know where they're carried. One of our guests from Friday night's episode, M4, does distribution for them. So go, hit them up and see where you can get it out here in Michigan. Of course, you can go grab it at Zatuna Liquor in Rochester Hills. Of course, another thanks to our sponsor, North Center Brewing over in Northville, Michigan. That's going to do it. Find us on all of our social medias, Better on Draft. Find out what we drank on our shows by following us on Untapped Pod Podcast. And no matter what you think of your beer, we think it's